So, you ready for some more practice on the most painful reading question type like ever? I know I am, and it's more like a necessary evil. Reading and writing fill in the blanks is worth a lot of points, and there are many of them in a single test, so you better put some effort into it, or you might just have to kiss the 79s goodbye for reading and writing. It's a very basic question type where you choose one word among 4 options for every blank in the passage. To get them right consistently, however, takes practice and dedication, and sometimes maybe a little luck. Here I am admitting that I can occasionally get lucky on a few blanks because some of the blanks can be nasty. The good news is that most of you are probably not going after a full score, then you can liberally make a few mistakes while getting the points that you should, and you'll most likely be fine. I'll skip the details on the basic stuff and jump straight into sample questions. Am I getting lazy? Maybe. Is it me trying to promote watching a stream of my videos in a row? Definitely. Besides, it's probably in your own interest to check out some detailed explanation and more questions discussed thoroughly. Let's begin with the first question of today. By now, you should have the impression that environmental conservation is really a hot topic for PTE questions. And here we have another passage about cleaner energy sources such as ethanol to replace gasoline in the near future. Sure, there are problems that need to be solved, but the predictions made on such technologies seem to be quite promising, and that's basically the whole gist of this passage. This passage is quite long, but it's nothing too difficult, especially in terms of the words given as options. Let's take a look at the first blank. The very first sentence in the passage talks about how future predictions rarely work out. That's pretty much it. It uses some different expressions and a fairly archaic word seldom, but you can just equate the word to rarely. Then you move on to the next sentence, which talks about how this is not the blank with bioenergy. Give it a try and see if you can find a common word that fits the blank, so we can then use it as a benchmark to form some predictions ourselves. I would say that this is not the case seems to work quite well, so we can dumb it down to looking for a synonym of case or situation. Right away, you should be able to see that circumstances is indeed a synonym, so you should favor it over the other options. Of course, you might want to eliminate the other 3 options just to be sure, so let's do that right now. Occurrence is a synonym to incident or event, especially in the case of something occurring or showing up. So it's incorrect because we're not talking about anything specific. Rather, we are more interested in the general picture. Incidence is a word that we talked about before. It means the likelihood or frequency of the incidents occurring, so it's also not ideal. Lastly, we don't exactly have any conditions in play here, so it's also incorrect. Looking at the second blank, it's one of those situations that some knowledge on common expressions can go a long way. The blank needs something that means definitely going to happen, because the next sentence right afterwards goes, it probably already has. So we need a word that is quite assertive here. It's quite obvious that called is incorrect, whether it means to have a phone call or to give names to others. Constrained means to set limitations, to compel or to restrain, so it's not the best definitions we need here. Then you have assured, which means to make sure of something, so is it the right pick? Well, no. The key here is the passive voice because we're picking among past parts. The technology can assure us to deliver some promising results, but due to the passive voice here, what's actually assuring the technology? Here's another example. I assure you that watching my videos can help you improve on PTE. In this case, because I am the one assuring you, you are the one being assured. It might take a while to wrap your head around it, but here's another reason why bound is the better pick here. It's a commonly used expression, as in something is bound to happen, meaning that something is definitely going to happen. This expression is a great example that it is more commonly used in spoken English rather than written English, but it's still something that can pop up in the questions. For the third blank, we have a sentence prior that talks about how Brazil has been exporting ethanol to the US, and they're doing quite well in terms of profit despite the fact that the US has placed a tariff on the imports. We came across this word before, which we shrugged it off because we didn't need to know what the definition is. Now though, it can definitely help if you can have a basic idea. It's a kind of tax on imports, and governments do that because they want to protect local producers against international competition. I might have just given away the answer. The answer is producers, but I'm sure that you guys are smart enough to see why. You'll definitely disappoint me if you choose directors or programmers because those two are for movies or computer programs, so not the correct context for these guys to show up. What about harvesters? To harvest means to gather things, especially crops, so there might be an argument for it. However, knowing that ethanol is a more sciencey name for alcohol, it's made using the harvest in the production, which suggests some manipulation or change to the original stuff. Right before ethanol, we have the word maize, which is another name for corn. Therefore, it's saying that the ethanol in the US is produced using corn, so harvesting is more like the step before that, making producers the better pick here. We have one more blank, which is another test on common expressions. Looking at the context, something is being done to the money, and the most important clue here is the preposition into right afterwards. Whatever past part you put into the fourth blank, it has to work with into. Because of that, you should immediately drop spend, because the most common preposition that goes with it is on, as in spending on food and water. Emptied can also be struck out, but for a different reason. The main thing here is that when you talk about something being emptied, again, pay attention to the passive voice, that something is usually the container, like how you can empty a bucket or empty your stomach. You know what I'm talking about. In this analogy, the money is more like the thing inside the container and not the container itself, so it doesn't fit either. Now, as to the last two options, I had some doubts when first attempting this question. The simple fact is that both seem to work. Money is something that's frequently described as a liquid, so personally, I don't see anything wrong to go with streamed, which means flowing in a direction. It kind of works with into as well, but I do agree that poured into is more common of an expression, so that's the one I picked. It is indeed the correct answer, and I'm pretty sure that none of the blanks will have two acceptable options. Moral of the story, expressions play a very significant role, and sometimes you do have to find nuanced reasoning to find the best option. That's also why I have been referring to the correct answers as the better or best picks, because in some situations you can certainly find arguments for the other options. It also goes to show that it's more important for the words to be suitable rather than sophisticated, and the pre-existence of common expressions should be your first go-to when making any decisions. Here's the second question. Holy crap, this passage is long. It is about mountains, tall mountains, and which tall mountain is the tallest. Imagine my pain when typing out the numbers and their names. I honestly couldn't care less if I accidentally made some typos in there because it changes nothing about how we do this question. After going through the text, you should have a general idea that there are mountains, and at different times, different ones were declared to be the tallest by surveyors. Whoops, I might have given away another blank, which may or may not have been on purpose. The word shows up a few times in the passage, so if you're still refusing to read the whole thing before making choices, I don't know what to tell you. It's like you don't want to do well at all. Let's quickly eliminate the other words so we can move on. Purveyor has a very similar spelling when compared to surveyor. Not gonna lie, this is a word that I didn't know before. After looking it up in the dictionary, it means a salesperson, a dealer, or someone who promotes a certain product. You learn something new every day, boys. While we're at it, a surveyor is not exactly someone who hands out surveys. In fact, the verb survey is closer to investigate and examine, which is oftentimes used in the context about maps or landscape. Therefore, a surveyor is precisely someone who examines a piece of land with the implied purpose of mapping it, or in the case of this passage, to determine elevation. Well, at least for these options, we're talking about people. That's a very easy way to rule out the other two options because they are not people. Apart from that, surveillance means to closely watch someone with the intention to catch criminal activities or suspicious behavior, like you might want to install a surveillance camera to prevent people from stealing your delivered items from your porch. Persuasion means to talk people into doing things, which is nothing close to what we need for the blank, so there you go. Before we reach the second blank, we learned that Mount Everest was once given a very plain name of Peak 15, and the declaration that it was the highest mountain on Earth came as a surprise, because it is surrounded by many other mountains of similar heights. Because of their existence, the other mountains were thought to be even higher than Everest, so we might need a word that means a false sense or something we didn't understand correctly. Right away, inclusion doesn't seem to be correct because it doesn't work with the following phrase of greater height. An allusion commonly refers to a figure of speech where the author makes an implied connection or reference, but it's up to the audience or reader to comprehend its intended meaning. Napoleon Bonaparte was famously defeated during the Battle of Waterloo, so an example of an allusion would be calling someone's epic failure meeting his Waterloo. It's an interesting word, but still an incorrect one for this blank. Anticipation is like a slightly more positive prediction or looking forward to, and it's still not an ideal option. Then you're left with illusion, which is a word you should definitely know if you have the slightest experience with video games. An illusion is a false appearance or image, or generally speaking, anything that tricks your senses. It can be something you see, or it can even be a false idea in your head, like a magic trick. It's the best pick here because we have a false sense of heights about Everest because it was surrounded by many other high mountains, so we were surprised to find out that it was in fact the highest mountain. Moving on. All 4 options in the third blank have the same root, and they're only different by prefixes. This is a golden opportunity to demonstrate how you can learn a bunch of words together. Here's what you should know. The root sept means to take something, and that can help you understand the words that are built upon it. The prefix ac for accept means towards you, so if you take something towards you, you have decided that you want it, and you consent to receiving the thing. The word except means to be taken out of a group, so if I say that everyone had fun except me, I was not a part of the fun group. Next up, the word incept is a weird one. As a verb on its own, it actually means to graduate from college, which is quite different when you think of the movie titled Inception. Indeed, the word inception means determining the beginning of an event or activity, which makes a lot of sense regarding what happened in the movie. Well, I've actually never watched the movie myself, I just assumed that it makes sense. This is a good example of how language evolves and words might pick up unintended meaning when people decided to use them differently or under the influence of other languages. However, the general rule actually holds for the fourth word intercept, which is used in a few contexts. It generally means to stop something from going somewhere in the middle of travel, so if an athlete snatches the ball midway through the pass, it's called interception. In math, the point which 2 lines meet and thus obstruct each other is called the intercept. With all that out of the way, we can clearly see that the best choice is accepted, talking about a certain height being accepted by the officials as the true height of the mountain. We don't even have to stop here because there are many other words sharing the same root, like concept, susceptive, receptor, deception, and so on. Most of them fit the rule that we just talked about, and there might be some different interpretations regarding the prefixes as you normally would with other words, but it's still a much nicer way to learn rather than just memorizing stuff, am I right? The fourth blank fits in the context that one dude named Sir George Everest was about to be given credit on surveying the height of Everest, and the mountain was to be named after him. How about that? I never knew where the name came from, and now I do. Then we learned that he argued something about the mountain retaining its local appellation, and because he's not a local, we can tell that he didn't like the idea of naming the mountain after him very much. In that case, we're looking for a word that means having an inclination to not do stuff, or at least to disagree. Application doesn't fit the blank, period. Implication means to hint at some results without explicitly saying it, so it doesn't fit either. Rejection means to turn something or someone down, so it's also not correct. This is one of those situations that if you don't know how the word reservations can be used, then you might falsely eliminate it, where in actuality, it's the correct pick. If you have reservations about something, it means that you have second thoughts. You're not entirely sure about it, so you're likely taking a conservative approach to this matter, which is what we need. He had some doubts about his decision because he believed that the name should be a local thing. What a nice guy. For the last blank, the text talks about how a certain peak was thought to be the highest, but it's not true and many other mountains are higher. Reduced certainly doesn't work here. I don't even know how a mountain might reduce the height of another one. Surpassed means being passed over, literally suggested by its root and prefix. It's a synonym to exceed or to be greater than, which is perfect for this context. Surmise means to assume something is correct without evidence, so we can safely assume that mountains can't do that. Lastly, we have transposed. The root is another common one, with other words like depose, impose, dispose, suppose, and so on. I won't get too deep into it, but the root means to put things or set things, and with the prefix trans meaning from one place to another, transpose literally means for things to switch positions, or for things to be placed out of context. Not something we need here for sure, so we can gladly decide on picking surpassed. Whew, this question took a while. I mean, I might have been a little too thorough, but there's good knowledge to go through that can definitely help you guys to make better decisions during the test and to improve on English as a general skill. I might be a little more concise with the next question, but I'll probably eat my words and get carried away regardless. Here we go. From the highest mountains to the tallest buildings. Be a little more creative, will ya, Pearson? Before we officially dive into discussion, I would like to comment a bit on this particular question. I have seen different versions of the same text somewhere else, but the options are slightly different. Sure, the correct words are in all the different versions, but the main thing I want to talk about is that it's much more reliable for you to know how they're done instead of just memorizing stuff. The different versions might be officially established to prevent cheating, or they might just be changed to have harder options. Either way, I'll be giving you guys some of the options that are worth our time to further demonstrate the techniques and things to look out for. Let's look at the first blank. The Eiffel Tower was built for a special occasion, and its success proved the point that iron was a much better material for buildings than stone. Therefore, we're looking for a synonym to show because Eiffel Tower showed that result. Actually, you can go ahead and pick demonstrate, which is a fairly common word that precisely means to explain something by an exhibition. As for the other words, implicate either means to imply something or to be involved in a situation, both of which are not ideal definitions. Same goes for insinuate, which means to hint at something without a direct mention. You might have an argument for picking suggest, which I can definitely understand. However, this is a case that demonstrate is more about visual proof and it's more accurate of a description than suggest, so there you go. As for the second blank, since we're talking about buildings here, it only makes sense for the correct answer to be constructed. No more to be said. You don't exactly invent a building, nor do you devise one, which means to design or to invent a procedure or a system. There's also nothing in the passage about renovating buildings, which means to restore the condition to a good state, to refresh or repair. One option I saw in one of the versions had established in the mix, and it is a good thought exercise to think about why it's still a worse pick than constructed. Usually, when you establish something, it's something intangible like trust, relationship, or a set of principles. So that's the major difference between these two words. Looking at the third blank, we need something that supports stuff. I don't even know why a building might have an engine in it, so it's probably incorrect. Also, the ceiling is probably not the thing that supports windows, so strike it out as well. Concrete is also incorrect because the upcoming phrase of steel beams and columns. These aren't exactly concrete, are they? So you're left with skeleton, which is sometimes used outside the context of living creatures to talk about a supporting framework. Another common word in the pool is structure, which might add a little more difficulty to this blank. The argument for picking skeleton is quite simple. It's still the more sophisticated and more accurate word. Also, structure shows up later in the same sense, which is a good tell that it won't appear a second time in quick succession. The fourth blank has quite a few big words, and if you don't understand what they mean, then you'll probably just have to tell me that investigate seems to work and move on. You'll be quite lucky to get it right this time, but it's important to utilize this situation to learn a few extra words. To exonerate someone means to not blame them for an action or a crime, which isn't something you would do to a building. To ameliorate something means to improve it, to make it better, which you might consider plausible for this blank. Indeed, it seems so, but people just had a fear out of unfamiliarity that the building might collapse, so it wasn't really unsafe to the point that it needed improvement, so this word is definitely implying something that we can't find in the context. Lastly, to consecrate something means to give the thing religious purpose, to make something holy, or to appoint someone to a position of religious power. Completely irrelevant to our discussion on buildings, so it's not the pick here. For the last blank, we are talking about two groups building their own skyscrapers and trying to get the title of being the tallest in the world. As we're picking an adjective for the noun title, whether it's formal or not doesn't seem to be the main concern here, so don't go with informal. People were fighting over this stuff, so it's probably not meaningless, so don't go with meaningless. It's also not something of royal status, so don't go with that either. You're left with coveted, and the word means greatly desired or even envied, so it basically means that it's a title people wanted, which then makes a lot of sense for them to compete for it. In some versions, you will also have the word desired in the pool, and you should still go with coveted because it's a more detailed word. Even though they are synonyms and the fact that desired seems to work in the text very well, coveted is still a better pick. Wow, these three questions really took longer than I expected. Not a big problem for me, I'll just reserve some questions for later episodes. We'll go through most of them eventually because it's important to develop a feel, an intuition, and a basic instinct so you can save as much time during the test as possible while maintaining a high success rate. Please like, subscribe, and share if you find these discussions helpful, and more questions are on the way. Donald Trump said that Dr. Fauci has a high approval rate, but he doesn't, and people don't seem to like him. Gee, you think? Dude's finally coming to his senses. There might be some hope to 2020 after all, and I'll see y'all next time.